Alright, so I figured it was time we go ahead and get started on 2019 movies, which obviously is going to just bring us a slew of masterpieces, no doubt, throughout the month. But before we get to stuff like Glass that I'm actually anticipating, we've got a couple of these here, and I figure I'll probably see that escape room thing at some point really soon, so potentially with Glass or something. But in the meantime, we have two. Neither of which, both, I guess you could technically say, had potential of some sort, whether it be what they were beforehand or what their concepts are, but then I remembered it's like the second week of January, and you know how that goes. So let's go ahead and start with the upside, which is a movie that's been brewing for a long time. I'm pretty sure it was at TIFF like 2 years ago or something. And Weinstein was behind it, so obviously it went through a lot of change to get to this point, and there was a huge delay as the studio changed and all that, and it ended up at STX. And even before it was even made, though, I remember there was so many actors and directors and writers like came in and out of it. And the thing about that is that obviously it's a remake of The Untouchables, the French movie from 2011. I think it was 2012 when it came out here. Um, and the thing about that, though, is that obviously everybody's going to get pissed off because that movie is insanely popular and so many people love it. I was a really big fan of it also. I thought it was a huge surprise, too, because when I saw it, like, the concept and, like, the poster, it was like, oh, it's one of those, obvious dramas about disabled people and, finding life or whatever. Just one of those cheesy, inspirational movies. And I didn't realize not only was it a comedy also, but how funny it was. But the thing was like I said, though, even though that movie took that concept in such a charming way, you can tell it's like a cliche, inspirational, two people become unlikely friends, true story movie at heart. Even if it did execute it extremely well. So, obviously, when I heard there was going to be an American remake, there was no surprise whatsoever. It's like, yes, of course. Like, if you were to just tell me this concept, I would have assumed it was an American movie first, honestly, because it just felt so kind of by the numbers, that kind of movie. So I wasn't, like, all bent out of shape or anything. Especially when some of the cast started coming out, like, originally, the cast I really wanted to see was there was that brief period where I think Paul Feig was going to do it, and it was going to be Colin Firth and Chris Tucker. But instead, we now have, obviously, Kevin Hart in the Omar Sy role and Bryan Cranston in the Francois Cluzet part. So, and that's... I mean, as much as I like Cranston, there's so many cases where he's, like, such a boring choice, like, such an obvious choice, which is kind of a shame. And as obviously I've never been really much of a Kevin Hart fan, but the thing about that was that everybody was kind of trying to build up this thing going in that, like, oh, this is going to be Kevin Hart trying his hand at drama. Well, for starters, if you're familiar with the original movie, you'll know how much comedy's in it, so not really. But at the same time, interestingly enough, obviously I've criticized Hart over and over and over again about how I just really don't find him funny. I don't find his style funny, anything like that. But for some reason, I didn't immediately dismiss the idea of him doing drama. Like, I actually kind of had to stop for a second, like, could that work? Like, I don't know what it is about him. I have no idea, but for some reason I thought immediately, like, I wonder if he's capable of that, because there's not really been anything I can think of that really shows that, so I don't really have anything to judge it on yet, and it sort of made me think maybe he totally could. He's got to be good at something. So, what we have here is, well, for starters, that's kind of been built up a little too much, because while there is some heavy drama in the movie, obviously, given the whole setup anyway, not a lot of that drama comes from him. And any time that he does have dramatic moments in the movie, it's really no different or more beyond when there's serious moments in a comedy, or attempted serious moments. How pretty much all comedies now have that, sort of down period where everybody gets all sad and shit or whatever. Really nothing beyond that in regards to what Hart has to do. All the really heavy stuff lies on Cranston, which is interesting because you hear that there's a French movie and all that, or not even necessarily just a French movie, but just a foreign language movie in general, and you think there's a good chance it's heavier than what the American version is going to be, because the American version is going to be all about, bringing in audiences and stuff like that, which is exactly what the other movie did. But regardless of that, you would think the American version is still going to somehow be like much lighter and all that. Weirdly enough, it tries to go bleaker. It's obviously, by the casting of Hart and all that, it's gonna definitely, go all in on the comedy, and probably obviously be a bit more crude and crass and all that, and have them getting high and shit like that. But the moments they decided to change some things up, where it's this weird case of it's technically the same thing that happens in the original, but they take it in different directions, which obviously would be, encouraged to do their own thing with it. But like I said, I kind of hate doing this stuff where it's like the whole thing is just comparing one movie to another. But I mean, they're just so similar for the most part, that it would just really kind of be me reviewing a somewhat lesser, well, not somewhat, but a lesser version of that movie, because like I said, they really didn't change much at all, yet somehow it still finds a way to be, like, just kind of here, and I think it would still feel that way even if an original didn't exist. Like, I think it would stand out even more, as, like, a sort of, cliche, unlikely buddies movie. Which I still think, the original movie isn't impervious to some of those moments. I still remember it feeling like, oh, this feels kind of a bit of cliche, enjoyable as the movie is. But this movie's much more susceptible to falling victim to that, as opposed to sort of overcoming it or making it better. And that's actually, even before we go into the bleaker stuff, there is the opening, where I noticed immediately that because I didn't want to go in saying like, oh well, this is what the original did and this is what this one's doing wrong about it, because it is kind of annoying when people just do that without even giving it a chance, especially since this isn't even like this is like, what was it? Obviously there's the French movie, and then it was remade I think twice in India, and then there's like a Spanish language version named Inseparables, and that all of those were before this one. So this isn't just, oh, America, remade a French movie because they're out of ideas. No, every fucking buddy's remade this movie at this point. There's like 5 of them. So, but the thing here, though, is when I immediately started kind of judging it based on the original movie was the opening. Because the thing that I remember vividly really hooked me immediately and made me realize, oh, maybe this isn't the movie I think it is, was in the original when we get the same opening scene here, but in the original we get that opening credit sequence where when they're driving down the road with the cops to the hospital and all that, and it's him playing Earth, Wind & Fire September, and it's this big, vibrant opening credit sequence of them just driving down the road to this song, and that just immediately, like, brings you into this movie, like, just hooks you, and that's what pulls you in, is that first moment, and then the movie can take you wherever the hell it wants because it grabbed you then. And this is one of those movies where it opened with just the title on a black screen, and when you see the title on the black screen, almost immediately you know you're not getting an opening credit sequence. And so I was kind of immediately like, okay, so the hook is gone. So they've got a lot of work to do. So they still do that scene, but it just does not have where the scene really took off in the original movie. We just fade to black and then do the flashback. So you can see right there, like, it's kind of hard to immediately not feel you've gone on a different path that may not be a better one, or it's... But still, you try to stick with it and see what else it's going to do. But the thing here is that obviously the chemistry between them has to be something. And like I said, even though I feel like Hart and Cranston were kind of boring, obvious choices, there is something there between the two of them that does work, the way they play off of each other. And there is something charming about watching them together. Like, even though you can feel how inferior it is, I was still kind of won over by them and just kind of throughout it, even if the scenes didn't, have as much of a richness to them, and I didn't, really feel like into it immediately, but it would still though it was never kind of permanent. I would always kind of go in and out. But when those moments that they had me, I was fine with it. And off to the side, also you've got his assistant of sorts. I can't remember exactly what her title was, but the Kidman character, and she's like sort of got this appealing iciness to her that I really like, just because it's impossible for me to, dislike Kidman. But even so, she's like incredibly underused and doesn't really get to do a whole lot with anything. Like the closest thing she gets to being able to do something is revealing to Kevin Hart that she actually knows a lot about baseball, which even then is like extremely brief, so it's not a lot. But I just kind of appreciated just her presence here in general. Like gave at least something to the character that probably wouldn't have been there with hardly anybody else probably. So it did have that going for it, but. Yeah, I suppose I can go back into the bleaker thing now, which is, without saying too much, there's where the original movie did kind of have that sort of upbeat quality to it. The thing is that this one's also trying to maintain that upbeat quality, which is really confusing when they take a couple of plot points and they decide to do the most drastically dark thing with them possible to really add a sort of, I guess maybe to give more drama behind Cranston's character and more tragedy. But tonally, there's not really enough of a balance here. So, like, you've got one scene of, Hart trying to put his catheter in and accidentally making him hard, and trying to find the exact place and all that, and having to pace around the room because it makes him feel weird and all that. And then the next scene will be Cranston saying, like, I'm under a do not resuscitate thing, and that's the only reason I hired you, because I knew that if I were to die, you basically wouldn't give a shit and let it happen. It's like, if I remember correctly, and it's been a while, I don't think I've seen the Untouchables since it came out in 2012 here, but I feel like it was something on the lines of he just liked the way that he was, like that just sort of his attitude, and the way that he was a lot less uptight than the other people he interviewed, and it was pretty much as simple as that. That's how I remember it anyway. But then there's that, and then there's the whole subplot with Cranston and his pen pal, which is one of like the more nice moments, like one of the more uplifting moments of the other one, and that just goes in a direction that just really brings the movie down. And it's like, and I suppose it's like technically the movie's succeeding if it makes you feel depressed, but I mean it just feels so unnecessary, especially as late in the movie as it happens, because it's one of those cases where it has the double conflict, where because the movie's over 2 hours. They both are, but this one in particular felt significantly longer because you've got the moment, like at the birthday party, when, Cranston doesn't like having all these people around, and he's, bitter with life, and it's just all wearing down on him, and he's really pissed off about this birthday party. And we think this is going to be the conflict, because, Hart's going to tell him he's being an asshole, and then they're going to argue, and that's what happens. But then Cranston's like, oh, you know what, let's just break some stuff, and I'll feel better. Break some stuff for me, and I'll feel better. And it's like, oh, crisis averted. It was kind of nice. It was refreshing to see that we were going to have that, usual cliche conflict in the middle, and then they just resolved it so easily. And it's like, great. But then, of course, we've got to get to the point eventually where it's the not-so-easily-solved conflict that's going to drag out until we finally get to an ending. And it's, yeah, and then it starts to feel long and a bit. In the direction, once again, I said we're coming from different directions there in how he ends up here. Like in the original, it's a lot more voluntary, and in this one, it's, I don't know. I just really didn't care for this Juliana Margulies scene, so I don't. Just the whole direction that went just felt off. And then it's. But that's the interesting thing, though, is looking at stuff like that and then realizing what they decided to keep from the other movie. So it's like, this is a movie that's like going to say, oh, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to be even bleaker when we can. If you'll remember, there is, at the end of the original movie, there is a Hitler joke. which is probably not as extreme as it sounds when you say that, or like what somebody would imagine when you say that. It's just how he gets his hair cut as a joke, and then they cut it off the rest of the way and all that. But the fact that this movie, I don't know, there was something a little weirder about this movie deciding to keep that in. And like I said, it's not like it's an extreme joke or anything. It's just he cuts Cranston's hair and mustache like that, and when he's in the middle of getting it all cut off. But I don't know, with the way this movie decided to go a bit darker than the other was like that's an odd thing because it's like this that's gonna and that's one of the jokes they end on. It's like one of the last jokes of the movie. I think is what makes it so bizarre. So I don't know, but it is interesting. Speaking of stuff that would be potentially controversial, it is also kind of interesting, even though this is a point that's been talked to death. I couldn't help but notice the whole thing about this really interesting sort of art and reality thing in regards to Hart and his character, where the whole thing of he's got this big criminal record and he did like prison time and now he's out and he's trying to better himself. He's trying to see his kid more. He's trying to, get some responsibility with the whole, getting money thing and then taking this job and sticking with it. But the Tate Donovan character comes in and keeps trying to bring it back up that his character has a criminal past, and Cranston just has to say, like, I don't care anymore, because obviously he's doing this, and it's to hear what the way he's been talking about his own life in the press tour for this movie, and the fact that his character's doing the whole, that's who I was then, this is who I am now, I'm trying to move on, and it's almost like he's been quoting his character going through this real life stuff, and it's whether you're upset with him in real life or you're not, we're not gonna go into that whole thing. But I just thought it was an interesting sort of mirror to what he's talking about right now versus what his character's going through in the movie. So it was a little weird and kind of unexpected, even though that's totally what the character setup is. But yeah, so that's. I think that might be about it here. So yeah, so I mean overall, like in retrospect, it's kind of weak. But I mean, if you're like and you're like in the moment, their chemistry will probably win you over if you're open to accepting that. Accepting that this movie exists, and so it might be fine in the moment, but all in all, after the fact, it is just sort of like it's just one of those, like I said, and that's kind of the main thing to look at is how would we view this movie if The Untouchables didn't exist and this was like the first adaptation of that true story. It would probably still be pretty basic and not really have a whole lot to offer. And like I said, they're really trying to build up the whole it's Kevin Hart's hand in drama now, but it's like not really. This is more that angle is more of a Cranston thing, but the stuff that he does have like that, he's fine with. He wasn't like, overly. The whole movie itself wasn't like overly annoying or anything like you may expect when you're the Kevin Hart was cast in the part. But if you're like me and just don't care for his style, but so yeah, so I think it does make me wonder though. Like I still kind of have that thought in the back of my head. It's like if you give him like a real drama, I do really wonder what he could do with it, and if that could be something he could pull off. I'm still interested to find out, like if like a full on role like that. But this isn't that, despite the fact that they're trying to build that up. But it's so yeah. For them, it's fine, and they are pretty much the whole movie. So that sounds probably more complimentary than it actually is. But yeah, I think you get the point now. So I'm just getting repetitive at this point. So let's go on to the other movie, which is Replicas. I saw a couple of posters for this a few months ago or something, and was absolutely shocked that it came to this theater. This had straight to DVD written all over it, I swear. I could not believe it was actually on the list of showtimes, because I was like, oh, let's see when the Upside's playing. Holy shit, Replicas, what the hell? So, yeah. So, and this is kind of in that line of, Keanu Reeves has been kind of on this comeback trail with everybody taken to what's soon to be the John Wick trilogy. And really showing he's still got this great hand in action, and that character in general and their stories and all that are like really working for him and really giving him a nice new franchise that's putting him back in a positive light when he's kind of been a punchline for a lot of his career for his acting anyway. But in between those John Wick movies, he's been still consistently in this area. Just earlier, like mid last year, I talked about a movie he was in called Siberia, which had like no redeeming qualities whatsoever, in the worst way. And this is, yeah, this is kind of what you expect it to be. Like if you, like me, mistook this for a straight to video movie, um, it, it, I'm still not quite sure if it wasn't made for that and then somehow ended up in theaters, because it's still, especially this opening scene that shows off the really, really shitty CGI. Like, I kind of couldn't believe it that this is 2019 now, and this is what the CGI in this looks like. Because there's the whole thing, the concept, as I was talking about, though, is interesting. With the whole thing of him, like, being able to replicate the dead with this technology that he has, and eventually, his family's gonna die, and he's gonna have to decide if he's gonna bring them back through that or not. In this sort of, like, Frankenstein sort of way or whatever. Um, but immediately, any hope that concept gives you is just sort of shot down the second you see this first robot or whatever the hell he is. It's like Alan Tudyk in I, Robot, only if he at the very start of his CGI process. um, and it's a scene that sort of reminded me of RoboCop, not Paul Verhoeven's movie, but the remake with Joel Kinnaman. It reminded me of that. Take that for what you will. But, and it's one of those cases where the opening scenes of the movie are just Keanu Reeves in the middle of a room. He's got all the Tony Stark technology that he moves around, and he's just saying, here's science stuff, and I'm saying science words, science stuff, science words, science stuff. And I don't think the writers were saying anything in particular. I think they were literally writing Keanu says science shit. And they just said, say words that sound like you're doing something profound with science, and then we'll make the robot come to life. And that's that's just our opening. That's before his whole family gets into the car wreck and dies and all that. And the thing about that, obviously, is when you think about the fact that this is a character whose family's going to die, his entire family is going to die in a car accident, he's going to try to bring them back to life using his science or whatever. So, in one part, you're looking at this type of movie and you're thinking, bad acting wouldn't matter. If anything, bad acting would enhance, the campiness of such a concept. Especially if it's going to be, like, straight-to-video quality. But then the other half is saying, like, well, this could be some pretty heavy character stuff before we get to the crazy replica shit. Because he's got to deal with the whole emotional impact of his family dying in a car wreck that he is also in. And he's, like, holding their bodies and shit. And then it comes to him that he can bring them back to life. And eventually, obviously, we will see them replicated because that's the concept. And it's like, no, there's totally room for, like, good acting in a movie like this, if you're using the concept right, even if it's, like, really over the top. Like, it would have added something to it if it seemed like the actors cared one way or the other, whether they were taking it seriously or going as over the top as possible. Just a hint of care in these performances would have probably added something to the whole material itself. But we've got Keanu Reeves and we've got Alice Eve. And with the way Reeves does it, he does have, like, obviously, like I said, he's been criticized as an actor for most of his career for that very recognizable delivery he often has. And here, it's like, it's not even that, it's below that. He says every line as if he's being repeatedly punched in the balls as he says it. And that's in any context, whether it be emotional, or during an action scene, or doing science speak or whatever. It's all kind of the same, and it all sounds really off. And I don't... It's not like I said, it's not just like he's reading the script for the first time as he says these lines. It's like he's trying to read this script, but he like dropped it in water or something and can't read it, and he's just trying to make it up and improv it as he goes while trying to read some of it. Is what it sounds like. That's this what his way of speaking sounds like. And then you've got Alice Eve, and she's saying her lines at the beginning, and she's doing the whole family thing, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize Alice Eve was like a robot at the start of this movie. I thought she became a robot later, and it's like, oh no, she's human. That's just her line delivery. Okay, that's just her acting. And we've got side characters like Thomas Middleditch is like his little sidekick or whatever. The only other dude that's in on this, and we've got John Ortiz as the guy that's like coming after him. That he doesn't want to find out. And John Ortiz's talent has been so wasted so many times, it's not even worth counting anymore. It would just be depressing. But, so you go into this, and obviously sounds like kind of a bit of a dark setup of him bringing his dead family back to life, and how's that going to go? And obviously it's usually going to be something, it's not going to go in a good direction for anybody involved. When you do the whole play God thing, you face the consequences and all that. Well, this movie isn't really too concerned about that, apparently. But on top of that, it does have another thing going on in, like, the first half. Like, it takes a pretty long time to do the whole resurrecting the family thing, despite the fact that that's what he spends the whole movie doing, but at the same time, for it to actually get to that point, it's like an hour in. This movie's only like an hour 45 or something, so that's a large portion of the movie where it's just him running around trying to figure out what the hell he's doing. And when in between those periods where it's not just fucking boring, you have this kind of interesting, almost thriller-like setup where because he's taken the bodies from the crash and hiding them so he can do this experiment that nobody knows about, he's got to hide the fact that they're dead. So he's got to call up the schools. He's got to go on like their social media and through their text messages, his kids, and pretend to be them, so the friends don't think anything otherwise. And it's like, I feel like there's something to that by itself. Like if this were about a guy that murdered his family and has to assume their identities through technology to make everybody think they're still alive, this would be a weird and interesting thriller, but oh yeah, it's this shitty sci-fi movie about bringing the dead back to life with robots or some dumb fucking shit. And we gotta get to that. But the thing, though, is that this movie is obviously so bad at almost everything that it does that even when it's doing something that seems like it's going to be interesting, or should be interesting just in concept alone, the execution is still going to be incredibly poor. Of course it is. So you get scenes like when he's talking to one of his daughter's friends, and she, a friend of hers texts to her and says, like, oh, somebody was flirting with your bae. B-A-E, well, that. Apparently people still say that. And so Keanu's response is to say, bae? Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. And, of course, if her friend were to think this was her, she would say, yeah, isn't that crazy? But she says, yeah, your bae won, in all capital letters. It's like, well, the audience thanks you for that, even though the very next thing that happens is Juan messages him. So it's like, we would have figured it out, who Juan was, without having his name, thrown in our face before he's actually shown. But it's like, this should be where that ended. Because if she actually took that as, my bae, who's that? Cover blown. But the movie doesn't, it just blows right past that. The movie does not give a shit whatsoever. All it cares about is the replica shit that's going on that it's not going to even talk about go really into for like an hour. It's just going to be Keanu doing this stuff, or talking his science stuff with Thomas Middleditch, and John Ortiz occasionally popping up to look for him. And it's just kind of all this on a loop, and nothing interesting happens for a very long time. Actually, I don't really recall what I would call an interesting moment in this outside of that whole concept where, like, he has to pretend to be them. Like, I seriously think that could be its own movie. And, like I said, with a better execution, you'd have a really interesting thrill on your hands, but the movie itself always comes back and ruins itself. So, and, there are moments, like, where it seems like there should be some big emotion. Like I was talking about where the acting might play a bigger part than you would think. Like, the scene where he decides to explain to Replica Alice Eve that she's dead and her kids are actually dead. But it's those line deliveries I was talking about are what's trying to bring this emotion out. So as you can probably guess, I was being very generous. They're saying the word emotion because there's none present here. You get a sense there's probably supposed to be, but it's got nothing. And that's not even to mention the dialogue itself. Like, talking about the way it's said is one thing, but the dialogue itself is like... I was talking about things like Bay, where it's like, do people even still say that? When things start getting a bit fishy, the cops come to his door. And when he answers and does the whole, thing with them and then gets them to go away, talks his way out of them suspecting anything, he turns around, he closes the door, and as he's walking away, he says, well, that happened. Because I just really imagine this dude with his dead family in the basement, hooked up to all the science shit, who's just had to talk the cops away from his house so they don't find this out. That's exactly what he would say. That happened. I don't know. But another brilliant Keanu line later would be when Alice Eve is starting to figure out some of the dark side of what's going on here, and she starts to kind of confront him, but he's trying to, stay on the down low in front of their, replica kids. So his exact line is, that thing that happened, there might be some things, is his explanation. Word for word. That thing that happened, there might be some things. That's it. That's his explanation. That's his way of saying, let's talk about this later. And that's what we're dealing with. So, all of that piled onto this whole thing of the bad CGI, the taking the potential and just flushing it down the toilet. And it even gets to a point where it gets bored with itself and has nothing else to do. So it just starts showing us shit we've already seen before. When movies just don't have enough shit to fill in their middle. So we've got him, like the scene I was talking about at the beginning, the RoboCop remake-esque scene. He just watches that scene all over again on footage, like on his computer or whatever. So it's like, okay, I guess we needed to see that again. And then, of course, when he's reliving the heartbreak and all that, or when he's trying to, I guess his mind is contrasting then and now and what is and what isn't, but we get to see more of the crash footage and when he was, like, holding their bodies and crying and shit. They just show us that again. Like, no elaboration, nothing that enhances the scene that it's, like, interrupting. It's just there, because the movie needs to be an hour 45. Couldn't have been 85 minutes or 90 minutes. It had to be an hour 45. Even then, even at 85 or 90 minutes, there's not enough here. I mean, there's plenty here, but this script isn't going to fucking find it or go into it. So, yeah, just more science speak, more... I was almost afraid they were going to try to make Thomas Middleditch some kind of, like, comedy relief or something. They didn't even give him that. He's just there. So, I don't know. And, of course, as you would probably guess, this does all lead to this hilariously dumb ending. And when I say dumb ending, I don't just mean, like, that last scene. I mean, like, probably the last 20 minutes or so. So, yeah, that's... So, like, you look at this and you think it could have been, like, this really dark thing. Like, it's probably... The very, very, vague concept surely is, like, Ex Machina inspired. And it's like, you imagine this concept with something like that. Like, you really could have done some deeply dark, thought-provoking things with this, probably, but, instead we got this Keanu Reeves movie. So, it's like they knew. It's like they knew what kind of movie it was, so they cast Keanu Reeves and, like, intentionally asked him to give the worst performance he possibly could. And... So, yeah. Like, I almost... Like, you see... And like I said, he's been criticized a lot, but, I mean, if you look at what Keanu's doing here, it's almost like they... Like, he even said, like, do you want me to do, like, the worst performance I possibly can? Like, they thought it out, and that was what they planned to do. He had planned to do, like, one of the worst performances he could do. So... There that is. So... Brilliant start to the year. Amazing. I just cannot wait to see what else January has to offer. Obviously, I'm really really psyched for Glass, even if like even the not so great critical reception so far isn't even getting to me. I just really need to see Glass, but I don't even know what else comes out this month. It probably doesn't matter. So, but we'll find out soon enough. Too soon, I'm sure. But like right after this, I am going to do more 2018 movies like The Favorite and Beautiful Boy and another one. So it's something that would fit more in this lineup. But yeah, and that'll probably be like right after this. So I'm probably gonna like just turn the camera off and then right back on and do that one. So until then, that's it.